here went to country school. I know there's fewer and fewer all the time, but not too many. Okay, I thought maybe there'd be more than that. Well, you know, Jackson County is really proud, of course, of our county. It's beautiful with its limestone bluffs and its streams and its river and its woods and its prairies. And we're just one of the most fascinating parts of Iowa because we were one of the first parts of Iowa where civilization first pushed westward. So we have so much to be thankful for, and we have 2 wonderful state parks. And I think there's only 2 counties in Iowa that have 2 state parks. I think every county has one, and we are fortunate to have 2 beautiful state parks. But if you don't know, we have more pioneer cemeteries than any other county, and we have more restored one-room country schools than any county in Iowa. So we're really proud of that. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about country schools in general, and one county school in particular. We're going to revisit Farmers Creek and talk a little bit about schools there. So I just want to thank Mata Reisling for all her help bringing us pictures and information that maybe we didn't have before. You know, of the 99 maybe country schools that there were in Jackson County through the years, some of them we have hardly any information about. Some of them we don't have even pictures of. We just know kind of where they were. Some of them we have a lot of information about, and luckily Newcastle is one of them. We have quite a bit of information about West Iron Hill, quite a bit of information about Watson, but some of the wonderful little country schools that lots and lots of children went to, we have so little information about. So we're always collecting information. And so today is one of those days when we're trying to collect a little more information about Newcastle School. For one thing, we don't know where it got its name. We don't know how it became named Newcastle, and that's kind of an unusual name for out in the middle of Iowa, middle of Jackson County anyway. So anyway, if you have anything to add along the way, please speak up, because we're doing this so that we can share our information and learn about things. So Farmers Creek is where this little school is located, in Farmers Creek Township, and you know there's 18 townships in Jackson County. The North Fork of the Maquoketa River just cuts diagonally right across Farmers Creek. And when you think of Farmers Creek, you think of the little towns and villages like Iron Hills, East Iron Hill, West Iron Hill, and of course Fulton to the east. And so that's where we're going today. So just to show you, I think, okay. Well, we have a picture, but now I can't make it do its thing. Alan, you want to come and just press the button for me? Would you? Something always goes wrong. I don't know. So I think if you just press the down arrow. That didn't work either. To the right. Nope. Okay, sorry. Okay, maybe here. Maybe we'll just have to.
Do you want to go back?
There. Oh.
It won't go forward. We may have to do this whole program backwards. I don't know. It worked fine a little while ago. All right, we're going to go all the way back up to the top and see what happens. Don't peek. You're not supposed to see these yet.
Don't peek. Shut your eyes.
Maybe now I can do it. Okay. We'll not. Okay, I think I can. Will you stay there just in case?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. My backup. Okay, and again, thanks to Mata. We have just some really fun pictures to just kind of make you enjoy what country school was all about. And Mata said that there was a time when so early on, they walked to school, they rode ponies, however they could get there. But later on, there came a time when they all would meet at her house with their bicycles, and they would ride to the school. And she did show me a picture I should have copied where you could look out across her field and you could see Newcastle School there. So these are just some of the people. I think she said there were 2 missing that day. Some of the people that would appear at her house and then they'd all ride off to country school together. And I just think that was so neat. Okay, so as you know, Jean Buckner, our wonderful artist, painted so many of the little country schools for us. And this is her depiction of Newcastle School. And you can see on the map there where it was. We're going to focus, like I said, on the Fulton area. And some of the families that lived there will be, really known to you. They were people like the Breeden family, the Knechtsteds, the Rockwells. There were the Campbells and the Suttons and the Jacksons and the Hans and the Turners and the Seaburgers and the Mayberries, right? And who could forget, it was also the home of Red Hinton and his 2 brothers, Jim and Ray. And so we're just kind of look at this area through the eyes of some of its residents. And one of the things that Lana was able to share with us, oops, sorry, there's another little map about Fulton, and you can see this is just part of the map, and you see Fulton here, and then right here was where the little country school was that we're talking about today. And Lana loaned us this wonderful little book, and it's called This Is My Life by Florence Campbell Risley, who Lana says was one of her probably all-time favorite teacher. And she just wrote this wonderful little book. It's just very quaint and fun. And she had in it some stories about Newcastle School. She wrote it in 1992, Florence Risley. And she wrote it as someone who attended Newcastle School and then later went back and was a teacher at Newcastle School. And one thing I found interesting about Florence Risley, who I don't think I knew, unfortunately, I wish I had, but her parents, according to the book, her parents were Wiley Campbell and Mary Ann, who they called Mame, or Mamie Seaburger. And so that leads us to believe that Mary Ann must have been one of the people that came here on the orphan train. And so we're really happy to have this picture. So there's Otto Seaburger and his sister, and they were orphaned. They came to Iowa on the orphan train, and then he was adopted by the Seaburger family. I'm not sure. Barb?
Her brother Otto was an orphan train guy. She was adopted from a Catholic orphanage in Dubuque.
But she came out with him. I have things that say that.
Well,
You must have things that say
I have
differently.
notes at home that tell who her mother was.
Okay.
And I think she was just born in Dubuque.
Okay. Well, we have to get that figured out, because that's definitely a discrepancy. But there you see her mother as a little girl and her mother as a young woman. And so she, like I say, just a delightful book that she printed only for the benefit of her family. It's not just out there. But she began her book like this. Everyday life is like a book. We write our own histories in our daily living, most of the time unconscious that each day is a thread in the story of our life. Ever so often, however, we are aware that we are completing a chapter and turning a page. And I thought that was really neat. She talked about growing up near Fulton on a farm where she was the third of 7 kids. And she said, don't remember my mother being pregnant, but she must have been, because there were 4 more children after me. And then she explained that by saying things were just different then. People spoke differently about things. And so that just kind of tells you the sweet kind of little book it is. She says that Fulton had a population of about 200 and had 2 fine grocery stores. We have one of them there. And that there were 2 churches, the Methodist Church, which is famous for holding their Jackson County Convention, one of the only ones the only one in the United States, I think, where people from all different Sunday schools around gathered together, and they had wonderful, wonderful programs and things. And then the Latter-day Saint Church that met at the school, actually at Newcastle School, around 1888. Another thing she talked about, everybody remembering, was the old pump in the center of town in Fulton. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
Yes.
I put an arrow here. I think that this picture is trying to tell us that it's right there. Does that sound right? But that's the only photo I could find of the old pump in Fulton. But she just has lots of memories in her book about Fulton and what it was like to grow up in that area. So, reading from her book, she talks about, and this is quoting her book, we all went to Newcastle School. We trudged across the fields in all kinds of weather. In winter, over the tops of fences when the snow was high, with our lunch and our little pail prepared in our kitchen. We had a great many teachers. My first teacher, and the one I remember most and loved her, was Marie Sagers. She used to take me on her lap and sing a little song, I've Got a Pig in the Parlor. Going to school had a great many pluses to it. All 8th grades were in the same room. Therefore, we heard lessons over and over from each of the different grades, or you could just shut off your head and do your own work. The drinking water would be carried by the pupils from a nearby farmhouse, and the exercise didn't hurt us much. We were a pretty healthy bunch. Outside of the usual communicable diseases, and we had most of them, one by one by one. Graduation from 8th grade went like this. The tests were sent out from the county superintendent's office in Maquoketa to each rural school. Then each teacher gave the test to the 8th grade pupils, returned to the office, and with patience we waited for the returns, which came weeks later. And then she said, well, I passed. So Mr. Stoddard was the superintendent at the time. Occasionally he would visit our school, and we were always scared when he entered the building. He was such a big boy to be in our little building, and his voice was very scary. However, he was a very kind man, which we found out later. Anyway, graduation exercises were held in Maquoketa, and we got a certificate, which we all felt very highly of. All the graduates of Jackson County Country Schools were in attendance, and it was a great accomplishment. And now I, for one, was lucky enough, or had the ambition, to go to Maquoketa High School. After graduation from 8th grade, I did go back to Newcastle for a year. That's when I or my parents didn't quite know what to do with me. Finally, we decided I should go to high school in Maquoketa. I took all the normal training courses, which are teaching courses, right? And that was the last year for it, the last year that they gave me. This allowed me and quite a group of us to teach rural country schools right out of high school. So I graduated in 1930, and in September of that year, I taught at East Iron Hill the fall term. Then Gwendola Hoot taught the rest of the year. She was from that district, and her father was on the school board. So it isn't always what you know, it's who you know. She says my wages were $50 a month, and I was really happy with that check. My method of transportation varied. At East Iron Hill, I rode a pony, and you saw her pony. I almost can't believe now that it was me who did those things. It was about 3 miles. Sometimes my pony would run away and leave me, and then I walked. And along the way, very later on, I could drive my parents' car. So when the bell rang, everyone took their seats. We saluted the flag, and we even said a prayer. The pupils were very helpful in doing their chores, such as cleaning the erasers, washing the blackboards, carrying in the wood or the coal for the next morning for the teacher, because it was her job to build the fire. And I got there early enough, and this is when she was a teacher, I got there early enough to have the fire going when the children came to school. And these children always did their jobs without question. I think things have changed a little bit. During school hours, each class came to the front of the room and sat on a bench and recited their lessons, or they'd go to the chalkboard to do arithmetic problems or spelling matches. We would choose up sides and have a contest to see who would win. It was always a good contest, a learning one. All in all, discipline was not really a big problem. Again, maybe things have changed. Our superintendent during the years, of course, was Mr. Stoddard, but there was also Mr. Martin and Mr. Long, L.L. Long, that we've heard a lot about. They seemed to shake or frighten the teachers and the pupils when they came. It was always such a big thing. We had no reason to be scared because they were all fine men, just big for us little ones in the room. And then she talked about having dental cards as a requirement to get those teeth in shape for adulthood. Does anybody remember in country school having dental cards? Did they have dental cards? And you took them to your dentist and had them signed? Or I didn't know about that. I thought that was interesting. And she talked about the big yearly programs that they had, where they had draw curtains across the stage, and where each child had a part, and where the entire neighborhood attended. And the lunchbox socials, where the lady fixed a decorated box of food that was sold to the highest bidder, and then she ate with the fellow that brought her the box. And at the end of the year, the teacher bought ice cream at Marus's ice cream parlor in Maquoketa for all the kids because it was the best. So that's just some of what her little book had to say. And she talks about many more things. And so hopefully we're going to scan that book and you'll be able to borrow a copy and read it because it's just awesome.
Where was the ice cream parlor at in Maquoketa?
Kind of is where the Green Mill was,
Oh,
before
right
the
there.
Green Mill.
Okay.
And they made Meadowgold ice cream. Is that what they made? I think that's the name of it, but they sold the franchise eventually. And they also made Royal Crown soda out behind. So it was quite the place. Okay, so in 1847, because we became a state in 1846, right? In 1847, a survey showed that in Jackson County, there were 911 pupils that were ready to go to school. Each of the 18 townships of the county was instructed that they had to choose a system. So they either chose a township system or an independent system. And I did not understand those, so I had to go to Betty Miller to figure out what that was all about. So under the township system, they act as a unit, and there were 6 to 8, well, there were always 8 to 10 schools in every township. That tells you why there were so many schools in Jackson County. And they would have, in that system, they would have one director, and then under the independent method, each of the 8 to 10 or more schools in the township had its own school board, and it functioned individually, and it had 3 directors and a secretary and a treasurer. So that's just a little bit of the difference. An example of an independent setup was Farmers Creek Township, and so schools like Newcastle were called independent school districts. So it's the Newcastle Independent School District. There were 13 district townships, so that there were 5 independent systems. And there were 37 one-room schools, each operating as an independent district. So, kind of to make it simpler, Farmers Creek had 10 schools. So within its boundary, it would have 10 separate school districts because it was using the independent system. Now, on the other hand, Perry Township, also having 10 country schools within its boundary, would have just one school district because it had chosen the district system. So, in 1900, according to the Maquoketa Record newspaper, okay, they reported that Miss Mame Mims and her students closed the fall term at Newcastle by giving an oyster dinner and a program. So we don't really know how early Newcastle School, when it very first began, we knew there were 2 schools, and the one we're talking about was the second school, the second Newcastle School. So they gave an oyster dinner and a program, and they achieved their goal of raising enough money to buy a flag. They had not had a flag, and they had a flag that would float over the building, as they called it. In 1941, the Sentinel reported that the annual county track contest, where there were 200 country school students taking part, Newcastle were in first place, and they were followed by East Iron Hill and Watson. So there was all kinds of competition. And I think Mona said that she remembers that those were held down at the ballpark, down by the river. That right? But it was a big deal. And whoever won that got an award to take back to their school, a statue, so it was really a big deal. And the kids all participated, and they all worked really hard to earn that. So in 1942, the Jackson Sentinel printed a history of the Newcastle School District written by John Heide. And he was 85 at the time. He was a pioneer resident of Fulton, and he said these things about the Fulton School. He said Newcastle School, that it was located in the northeast corner of the farm which Ballard Ballin Breeden had owned. And you probably think of him as B.B. Breeden. In our history, he's known as B.B. Breeden. He got his land from the government when he first moved here, and so he gave land for the school. Soon after the first school was built, B.B. left for California, and in 1888 gold rush, he returned with $1,500 in gold dust. So he was one of the successful ones that went. And again, this is he talking. Said the school was used as a voting center. At one time, it boasted an enrollment of 96 scholars. Can you imagine 96 students at one time going to this little schoolhouse? He described the boundaries of the district, that they bordered on the east by Farmers Creek. There was a grist mill about a half-mile away, he said, and the district was known for its excellent buckwheat. And he remembered that one year he raised 204 bushels of buckwheat, gosh, sorry, that was cut with a scythe and thrashed with flails. The miller ground the wheat with stone burrs, and he goes on and on telling about that. He said that at the time he was writing this in 1942, that those stones were on display at the Ellis Museum. So I should have looked into the records, but I'm wondering if that is the stone that's now by our machine shed that's on the fairgrounds, and I think probably it is. So he talked a lot about things like that. He also talked about an old bridge. And he said that there was a bridge across Farmers Creek, and nearby there were 9 houses, 5 log houses, and 4 frame. And he claims that this was the area, not Fulton, because everybody says it's Fulton, that was called Dogtown. And that whiskey freed slowly from a large barrel. And that was the thing that, if you remember in Jackson County history, they talk about the ladies in the area going in with an axe and taking matter into their own hands during the temperance movement. They cut up the barrel and the whiskey flowed away, and that was their contribution to the temperance movement. So the district ran a mile north of the school and west to the Maquoketa River and south to the Fulton School District. And so he said besides 9 houses in Dogtown, there were 26 other houses, and that made up the balance of the district back then. He also said that cattle ran at large, and all fences were rails, built, with the zigzag, the rail fences, and that the livestock, which were smart, just lifted up the rails and got through and raided all the fields. And he said that he furnished cordwood for the school much of the time for 95 cents a cord, and he stacked it at the schools. And then he tells the story about the hickory stick. He said everybody heard about country schools and the hickory stick, but the Jackson Sentinel in 1906 published the following story. It was about Miss Estella Frank, teacher. And instead of Newcastle, the paper called it Castle Grove in Farmers Creek Township, so we know it's the same. But she whipped Harmon Wilson, a 13-year-old scholar boy, quite severely with a hickory stick. The parents had Miss Frank arrested on a charge of assault battery, and County Attorney Palmer prosecuted, and T.E. Elwood defended the parties to the suit. The case was heard before Justice Ralston, and the court held that the teacher, in her earnest endeavor to keep order in the school, had exceeded her authority, and she should have expelled the boy from the school and reported her action to the board. His Honor imposed a fine of $1 plus costs. So John Heide also talks about a big anniversary that was held at their house. He wrote, my parents moved there in 1875, and I remember part of one heavy enrollment in the winter, the little school forced us to sit 3 in a seat during school. All of my brothers and sisters, there were 9 of us, 8 of my children and 6 of my grandchildren later attended the school. But to date, 1942, 4 generations of his family had attended Newcastle School without any break in their enrollment. And he also said that students, as a rule, attended school until they were old enough to vote, and they found that they might have a different teacher with each season of the school. So there were 3 different sessions in the school year, and they might have a different teacher for each of those sessions, as teachers just moved around and moved around. So he said, and again, this is 1942, which is a long time ago. There's a different mode of teaching now. The stars and stripes fly in the breeze. The school has electric lights and a telephone and many other improvements. And then someone that I think a lot of you may remember is Teresa Bickford. Teresa Bickford was one of the most remembered teachers at Newcastle School. She was a dedicated member of the Historical Society. She wrote an article for the 1989 History of Jackson County that the Historical Society printed. And so this is kind of what she had to say. When the settlers arrived on the banks of the Mississippi, they did 3 things in the following order. They built homes, they built a school, and then they built a church. And usually they used the school for a church until they could get their church built. But at first, she said, teachers had no special training. Oftentimes, schools were taught by anyone with a special aptitude for learning, some of them no older than 13 years of age. Teachers received very little pay, just what the parents could afford in the early days. And of course, we all heard the stories of how they boarded around with people in the neighborhood. They'd stay a week, with maybe 2 weeks with this parent or this household or that. The buildings were heated with the most primitive type of stoves. And greenwood was used for heating. Dry corn cobs were needed to start the fire on cold winter mornings. And when they were near the stove, their fronts were hot and their backs were freezing. And sometimes she said it was necessary to pull the benches way up to the stove just to keep the kids a little bit warm. The windows, if there were any, and we do know that some of these schools didn't even have windows. Windows, if there were any, were loose and they would rattle when the wind was blowing, and so they helped that by stuffing rags into the cracks. And sometimes the snow blew in and it had to be swept up during the day. Then she said, these schools had a distinctively pleasant odor, which experienced teachers could recognize as a combination of old books, chalk, sweeping compound, and wet wraps, which were hung around the stove to dry after a wet morning. Pupils rode their horses or walked to school, and it wasn't until when Iowa became a state in 1846, it wasn't until 1847 that the first appointment for school funds was made. And then after that, things began to improve little by little because they started getting, instead of just parents funding the schools, they started to get a little bit of government money. So we have a long list of teachers who taught there at different times, and I'm not going to read them all because you'll see some of them in the pictures that we have. But if you're interested, we know probably 20, 24 teachers who taught there at one time, and the years they taught there, maybe just going backwards a little bit. Adabelle Willison taught from 1954 to 1958. Adabelle, okay. Adabelle Willison. And she taught until 58, so I'm assuming that that's probably when the school closed. We have a couple students from that school back here. See?
I'm not sure if she was the last one or not.
Okay, she may not have been. She's just the last one that we haven't. So that's something else we need to know, that we haven't been able to find the information for.
I can find it for you.
If you would, we'd really appreciate it. That's why we do this. So there was a Lucille Flynn, Flora Sutton, Lucille Erie, Mrs. Merritt, Iowa, Florence Risley, and who we just read her book, and she was there from 42 to 43, from 47 to 48, from 49 to 50, because these teachers really moved around. And Luella Ruff, and Zirkelbaum, Teresa Bickford, and I don't know how many others that, that you might remember, but it's really neat. So I just thought we would just look at some of the pictures that have been turned into the Historical Society over the years. First of all, that's what the school looked like. Is that maybe what it looked like when you ladies were there? Not quite?
It was nice because it had a reach and all that.
Okay, and a lot of these pictures, again, if we had a date for them, I put the date. But that's the little school of Newcastle. And here's one of the earlier pictures of students. It's from, as you can see, from 1912 to 1914. And you'll recognize a lot of those names, I think. Here's another, 1918. You see all the Campbells, Heidi's, and the Mayberries. So if you have any comments, we need to hear them. This is on to 19. So these dates are hard because there were three terms during each year. So when a teacher taught there, it's hard to, sometimes they don't quite line up. But most of you have heard about G. Edward Binns. He was the county recorder. He was a county recorder, I believe, for many, many, many years, decades. But he became a country school teacher when he was quite young because his mother had been a country school teacher. So he taught for about 10 years, and then he kept very good track of his students as they grew up and did things, lived their lives as he was county recorder. And he always remarked about how he had taught them in school, and then he signed their papers when they got their marriage certificate, and then he, he just kept coming in contact with these people again, and how much he enjoyed all of that. And if you have anything to add, we know that we have probably errors here and there because all of these things were just given to us and people remember things differently.
A lot of rock walls.
There were, weren't there?
Is that true?
Question?
Well, I just said it looks like my mother from here, but her name is.
Okay, so tell me her name, I can't remember.
My mom?
Yeah.
Lola.
Okay, I
She
do
would
not.
have been a Campbell.
Okay. So, Lawrence, Max.
I like the dresses.
Yeah. I don't remember ever wearing a dress. I don't.
Really? Well, in town, we certainly had to. Okay. And again, so do we know whose farm that is?
What's the Tracy farm?
Would it be the Tracy farm?
Yes, that would be our farm.
Okay, so this is Mona Reisman's farm right here. So she could just look across and see the school,
Yes.
ride her pony across there.
And there's that outhouse looks really small, but it isn't. It was.
It seemed big, didn't it?
It did.
All nice.
Well, it just seemed like there was more room in it inside.
There, we did a lot of things inside.
So look at that schoolhouse. Can you imagine how many kids did we say were in there at one time?
96.
96? Wow. Okay, so again, we don't have dates for when some of these pictures were taken. I wish we did.
That's a storage shed on this side.
It was
Okay.
a whole shed.
So did Newcastle ever have playground equipment outside?
Oh, yes.
Okay, it doesn't show in any of the pictures, I don't think.
Behind the school.
Behind the school?
Because we had swings and a teeter-totter.
Very much, yes. Finding.
Okay. All right, and again, we don't know the date here, but Teresa Bickford was the teacher, and there are also parents in that collection, it says. I know there were two Han boys, and was it Neil that became the doctor? And Neil became a doctor, and his book is upstairs, I think, that he wrote a book. So 1942. So is this Alabama Jim's son?
I don't know if it's son or grand.
It would be a grandson.
A grandson of Alabama Jim? Okay.
And Patty Tracy.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Which would be Mona's sister.
There you are.
And I heard stories about Jimmy and what a character he was and how he always wore a little cap. Tell us again.
It was like a bomber cap. It was a Warriors. It was like a bomber cap. And he had a few collected buttons. So you have to go, you know, you pin them on the buttons.
So he had, yeah, so he had buttons on it always.
Okay.
And he was an instigator, I heard.
Yes, he was. He was a genius.
So if anybody knows who any of these unidentified students are, we would truly love to know.
I bet we would.
We know them all.
Well, then, you have homework then. There's a swing set, right?
No, no.
Sailor suit. My coat was like a sailor suit. It was fly. Yes.
So we're up to 1948. And again, this is Florence Riceley. And we heard her story from her wonderful little book that she wrote. Jim Merrick, he was the one with the little hat, right?
He was the one.
I'm in that one.
Yeah, that's Elaine, the little girl.
So this is Elaine.
That's Elaine.
There's Elaine. Elaine Knaxton.
Yeah, that's her.
So, Mona, which one are you?
I'm the one next door, the other side left.
There.
The big one.
All right. But look at the books. So we've always been told that early on, there were not very many books in the country schools. That books were expensive and hard to come by. So the very early schools, and when the county superintendent had to visit each little school at least twice a year. And when he visited, he always reported how many books were in the library of the school. And back in the day, there weren't very many, but things are obviously looking up here. So they must be getting ready for that big contest we talked about.
That was
Ping pong.
Yeah, that was indoor activity.
So there's Judy Hinton. Red Hinton's daughter is in there.
Nancy.
So this would be Linda Coolman,
Yes.
maybe from Bluff Lake?
No,
No?
no, not that one.
It would be the
Different.
The third one in from the right there, I think.
That looks more like her, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that's Irwin on the very end, or a Gilbert God.
Well, we can see that these girls are going to have to get together and give us, straighten our names out. Okay, does anybody remember what this is?
It's a ping pong.
Ping pong.
Well, I see the table on the top. I'm talking about underneath.
No. It's called library table.
Aha, Who can tell us about the sandboxes?
Oh, I can.
Okay, Nancy, tell us about the sandbox.
Well, when Chuck redid our school, that schoolhouse, that sandbox was up in the harvest room of the seed plant.
Okay,
And what it is they put sand in it and then they did different things in it.
but learning things, right?
Right. Learning
Some-
activities, then
Hide things.
you could hide things in it, I think you could build things in it. But the
Sure.
funny part is, Dad brought that over to our house when I was little and grew germination tests in it.
Oh, my
Lined it with
goodness.
plastic and put dirt in it. So
Okay.
you could do those kind of
You
things.
can do those
too.
kind of things too. I remember when I first came, somebody donated one to the museum. So we have one of these little sandboxes upstairs in our main museum. And I thought to myself, a sandbox. Why would they have a little sandbox in a country schoolroom? Because, you know, if it was bad weather and they couldn't go out for recess, not very many kids would fit around that. And I finally learned all of the different learning things that they did with that. Like they would, if they were studying the wars, they'd model the battlefields in the sand, and, you know, like sand castles only. And they did many, many things to learn with a sandbox. So I bet that is their sandbox.
On that back, or you can't go back, but on that other one.
This way?
Just look how much taller Judy Hinton is over the rest of us.
She
We've been
is.
older.
Look
I
at
just
that.
remember her, actually, she's younger than me.
But I'm older than those.
Yeah. But
She really is tall,
But she is tall.
she just was a tall girl.
right?
Yes.
So we looked at that one. And then that one, we don't know the date, but it must be somewhere in that neighborhood, right? So Margie is your sister. Okay. And some of them have grown and caught up with Nancy Hinton.
Yeah.
I didn't realize anybody went back after graduation.
Well-
And you said that Florence did.
She says that in her little book, because they didn't know what to do with her. So she went back for one more year of school. And now we don't know who these people are.
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Oh,
can you tell us?
Jim Merritt.
Yeah, Jim Merritt.
Okay, Jim Merritt.
Isn't that Patty there?
No, that's me.
That's you.
Mana.
That was Edwards.
That's Edwards,
And there's Judy.
Judy, and
And
Judy
me.
Hinton.
And that's Elaine.
Yeah, that's me.
That's Elaine.
First girl is Nancy. And,
This is Nancy.
Uh-huh.
and Larry
Rick
Coleman.
Coleman, and I think that's Marge.
That's Margie.
Okay.
And Roger
Roger
Cressy.
Cressy.
Okay, so good job. So we have to write those down. I should have asked my stenographer, Rose, over there to take notes today.
paper with me.
I should have warned you.
Well, unless I use the back of this.
Yep, okay.
Okay, now you guys go back and you tell me what's named.
Okay, Elaine's coming. I will tell you. Okay, so this is maybe the first year that they did school pictures like this, right? And that's Mrs. Myatt's class, but I can't read the date. It's blurry. So we don't know who those young people are either, but it must be one of the last school classes, I'm thinking.
I think it says 1958,
1958?
I think.
Okay. So we have to figure out who these people are. And then, I'm sure that this is after the school was no longer being used
Neglect.
and was being neglected and the vines were overtaking, but it was still standing tall in 1993, right? And then came
Aw.
2007. And it was starting to deteriorate, of course, by then. But according to the Bellevue Herald Leader, there was a horrible storm, and this big tree snapped right in half and landed on the school, and that really began the end of the school. So some very sad pictures of the end of a wonderful school and a lot of memories. So this is your brother Bud? Is that Bud?
I can't tell from here.
Okay, it just says 2010 Bud Knackstedt.
Okay.
Okay, you did have a brother Bud, right?
Yes. I just can't see.
Okay, but this is so sad, isn't it? It's just so sad. So, and there again we have Patty and Mara on their horse. And she tells me that this is their first day of school, and look at their fancy new lunch boxes. Thank you. And just like Florence said so many years ago, with their own lunch fixed in their own kitchen. And I think that's probably the last picture it is. So, anyway, does anybody have school memories to add before we close? Any? I mean, one country school couldn't be that different than many others. But it was certainly a great time. And it's amazing to me how many kids came out of country school and just went on to do great, great things. And there was a list of people from Newcastle and some of the things that they had gone on to accomplish. And that was neat. I should have, it was in her book. I should have written it down. I just remember Dr. Hahn, Neil.
Yes.
Neil Hahn was a doctor.
Fred.
Fred? Oh, Fred was the doctor. Neil was his brother, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, anyway. All right. So, as we try to fill our files, find information on some of these many country schools that we know nothing about, but who had stories just like these stories, please, if you come across any pictures or you know anybody who attended these schools, we really would like to gather that information together. It's been 10 years, I think, since Elaine Mercado wrote our country school book. She's been gone for quite a long time.
Bonnie, you have a question over here.
Okay, and that book truly needs to be, truly needs to be updated. But we have people that come in and they want to, pictures, they want to look, they want to research their school. It's really sad that we have absolutely nothing for some of them.
When I went to the country schools, we were always required to wear a dress.
Yes.
Did everybody else?
No, just in the early, the school years, that's the grades there's water.
Until the big high school was built.
And we had to wear dresses to high school when I went to high school. But that was a long time ago. But we had to wear dresses. But when it was cold, I used to see people with slacks underneath their dresses. So I wonder if maybe that's what some of that was. But Barb?
I remember going to a church women's meeting at Florence Campbell's. I don't remember, Lois Campbell's.
Lois
And
Campbell's.
Mrs. Ben Gorder, who I believe was a country school.
Yes, she was.
She was there. And Maquoketa, the country schools had just voted to come into Maquoketa School District. So they were all going to close. And Mrs. Van Gorder was so upset. What were those little girls going to do in the wintertime? Because they let them keep their pants on under their skirts all the time at school. And they wouldn't let them do that in town.
In town. This is Van Gorder. Florence. Was it Florence? It was Florence Van Gorder, I think. And we had some wonderful pictures of her teaching at her country school. And I'm sure she taught at more than one, and I don't remember which school it was. But she's sitting at this big upright piano, playing this piano for all these little kids, and you can just see the joy on her face, and her arm is up in the air, and it's just the most wonderful picture. If I had, I just have to say, if I could change anything about my life, I would have liked to have grown up on a farm, which I didn't, and I would like to have gone to country school, which I didn't, because I think it was just a wonderful experience. And maybe we need to go back to that, I'm not sure.
My mother, she attended, her and her sister attended the Emmeline Church. Or in Emmeline School.
Emmeline School. And I got to go there once in a while because my cousins did live on farms, and they did go to the Emmeline School. I got to visit once in a while, but I didn't get to be part of that. Elaine?
You know, I think we really learned more because we were hearing all of the grades. And, you know, some of that sunk in, and I just really think we did learn more.
I think that's true too. I think it had very good things. And I think it's wonderful to hear how well behaved the children were. I mean, if you had a teacher that was maybe younger than you were, that's really important. And they were really, really well behaved, and they helped with the chores, carrying water, and just, I think it was a wonderful time. So, Ernie?
Yeah, if you've ever read Little House on the Prairie books, you know, she talks about the country schools and everything.
Sure, sure. Just a wonderful time in the history of our country that we kind of need to revisit from time to time. So please, if you come across anything about any little country school, please share it with us, because we've got some pretty empty files, and we would like to have them all bursting with information and pictures like our Newcastle school. If anybody ever learns where that name came from, Newcastle, there's got to be a story there. Okay, thank you so much.